Hi there, and a very warm welcome to Season 6, Episode 23 of People Soup. It's Ross McIntosh here.
These are behaviours that are socially impulsive. And usually it's because people think of it as an on-off button.
Right.
So if we link this to positive psychology and strengths-based coaching, there's the idea of an overused strength. So often it can get you into trouble. And one way of people getting a fresh lens in these areas is instead of treating it like an on-off button, to treat it like a volume dial. So you've had something that is, at 9, 8, 9 or 10. And then as a coach, we'd have experiments where, try going in with, at level 4 or 6. And suddenly it's more, consciously dialed to the context.
Hey, supers. In this episode, it's the second part of my chat with Tom Loncar. Tom is an accredited coach, mentor, and contributing writer on leadership to a variety of business and professional magazines, including The Psychologist, the official magazine of the British Psychological Society. Tom's People Soup ingredients are curiosity, enthusiasm, and learning, with a side order of building connections. Tom discusses the concept of intellectual humility, emphasizing the importance of recognizing our incomplete knowledge and welcoming the possibility of being wrong. We explore the zombie quagmire, feedback processes, and the challenges leaders face, such as executive absence, miscalibrated authenticity, and the aversion to delegation. The discussion also touches on psychological flexibility, the impact of multitasking in meetings, and creating an environment of psychological safety, particularly in cross-cultural teams. For those of you who are new to People Soup, welcome. It's great to have you here. We aim to provide you with the ingredients for a better work life, from behavioural science and beyond. For those of you who are regular Pea Soupers, thanks for tuning in again. We love it that you're part of our community. Let's just scoot over to the news desk. I've mentioned some new offerings for 2025, and I've launched my open course bringing ACT in the workplace to the public. It's training I developed with Dr. Paul Flaxman, and I've already delivered it to thousands of adults in the workplace and received tremendous feedback. It's for people who are interested in navigating their working lives more effectively. It'll help them consider what really matters and what might be getting in the way of them being the person they'd really like to be. Such was the curiosity in the first free introductory session I held last week that I'm holding another one on Friday the 16th of May from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. British Standard Time on Zoom, and you can get your free ticket via the link in the show notes. Please do think about passing on this opportunity to a friend, colleague or family member. And hopefully I'll see some of you for the free session on the 16th of May. So let's crack on. For now, get a brew on and have a listen to the second part of my chat with Tom Loncar. So Tom, I'd like to dive into your topic. And this is where we first connected on the old LinkedIn, where I'd seen your article on intellectual humility. So let's first of all try and introduce that to the listeners. So tell us a bit more about what intellectual humility is, please.
It's about welcoming a good kind of fallibility into our thinking. So it's recognizing that our knowledge is almost always incomplete or inaccurate, and that our beliefs might be wrong. And also in terms of the sort of cognitive processes around that, in terms of how we acquire knowledge and how we build our beliefs, that those processes are flawed, through our own blends of cognitive biases. So it's about welcoming the idea that I might be wrong, and that's really okay. And it's about recognizing that more often in situations that might benefit.
Yeah, I'm immediately hooked, as I was by your article, Tom, because you and me both know, and people listening will realize that leaders can often feel that burden of kind of, I need to know everything. Let's go a bit deeper. And I love the way you describe in your article the zombie quagmire. Tell us a bit more about the zombie quagmire, because that's quite captivating.
Yes, well, that's referencing an article that came out in the Leadership Quarterly last year by a chap called Haslam and his colleagues, and it was called "Zombie Leadership: Dead Ideas That Still Walk Among Us." It described 8 so-called axioms of zombie leadership, and I think it was axiom 6 that I think is particularly relevant to intellectual humility, and that relates to leadership being the preserve of only special people, like only special people can be leaders. So it sort of imposes a dichotomous kind of, leaders there, followers here, and then with that sort of implicit assumptions about infallibility from those who get to that rarefied station that is leadership.
I love that axiom, yes. So tell us how you applied that sort of quagmire to how leaders can get trapped in terms of this intellectual humility.
Yeah, well, in my article, I look at 5 leadership development scenarios where leaders and those aspiring to be leaders might not recognize that they've got sort of rigid assumptions at play. And the first of those was something we talked about before, was the area of feedback, and particularly 360 feedback. And particularly the first time you ever get 360 feedback, and the sort of the perturbances that can produce in you, in terms of, you might have a belief about your competence on certain, leadership dimensions, and then there might be these alternative truths coming in where, you might think that you're a great communicator, but then the evaluations come in and they might rate you differently to how you see yourself. And so really a lot of those 360 reports produce graphs, and you can actually visually see the extent of a blind spot that you might have. So it's quite a sharp kind of contrast between your belief and the beliefs of others. And so it can produce some quite defensive responses that aren't intellectually humble.
And we mentioned before that sort of kind of quite strong reactions to maybe a 3-word phrase.
Yes.
That really sticks with them, but they almost get in a state of retaliation.
Yeah, it can be retaliation and conspiracy theorizing, and be blaming others. It could be just extreme disappointment, like, can't they see how hard I'm working on their behalf? And any range of kind of inflexible responses. Yeah, so it obviously links to psychological flexibility.
Yeah.
And the process that I introduced there was diffusion. So with any beliefs, even if they're submerged about yourself, it can be like a capital T truth. And so once you see these alternative beliefs, it's expressed through other people's evaluations, it can be quite challenging. Whereas with diffusion, you can soften that capital T truth and, change it to your small t truth along with these other small t truths of others. And then you just look at the data. It's just data after all. And that's very similar to, ideas about diffusion in terms of, it's just a thought. So this is just data. And so what can I do about it? What's interesting about it?
Yeah, bringing that curiosity to the fore.
Absolutely, yes.
And what other things are there in the quagmire that might derail a leader's intellectual humility?
Okay, there's another scenario in there which I've called executive absence, and that's about the presence one activates in meetings. And as we all know, after COVID, back-to-back meetings are increasingly the norm. And so, my clients find themselves multitasking in meetings, and everyone's doing it because that's the norm. You're in a meeting, you're attending to emails. I can remember one client who shared with me that in one particular meeting, they were also attending another meeting. So they were multi meeting themselves. But really, it dilutes your presence. So, while these sort of interpersonal situations were once a forum for building executive presence, it's now a weird kind of absence, and it's kind of normal. Like the evidence suggests that a lot of like with this profusion of meetings, a lot of once useful meetings, like your daily stand-ups that were once essential, are now just things that you grin and bear it. It's in the calendar, and you just show up without much intentionality. And you might be wondering, how is this related to intellectual humility? The way that I did it in the article is that it's a willful attention away from useful data in the environment. So Stephen Hayes has called the process of presence as useful noticing of both the internal and external environment. So I'm relating it to that external dimension of looking, what's interesting out there that I might be missing. And this also relates to historic wisdom, like the leadership guru from many years ago, Warren Bennis. There's a great quote that I've heard attributed to him on quite a few occasions, in that the best leaders are also first-class noticers. So they've got this ability to direct their presence flexibly. So a nice sort of convergence with psychological flexibility.
I love the way you've related this to a really naturally occurring phenomena in a meeting. And I've seen it in a group before. But the interesting thing is this was a group in person.
Right.
And they had their laptops open.
Yeah.
And they were typing away.
Yeah.
And I paused and said, hang on. Is everyone taking notes? And there was one person around that table who revealed what they were all doing, who took the honest stance and said, actually, I'm replying to emails. And it had become the norm for that group.
Yes, and there seem to be short-term efficiency gains, but then again, bringing it back to psychological flexibility, the workability over the long term, it might be workable for someone in a lower level transactional role, but for leaders, it's setting up patterns that should be surfaced and questioned.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm fascinated by these things that could happen in the absence of intellectual humility. There was one you said about kind of stagnation through aversion to delegation, if I've got that right.
Yes. And you're probably thinking I'm drawing quite a long bow on this one, but hear me out.
Yeah.
Right. So I do a lot of work with, it's a leadership academy for one of the state governments here in Australia. And in terms of the 360 that they use, being able to delegate more is the second highest or second most nominated opportunity to improve in the many thousands of evaluations that have been done in the database. And so it mainly applies to people who are just sort of leaving subject matter experts or leaving teams where they're all, in the same field, to more multidisciplinary groups of people, and an aversion to letting go. So staying in the weeds, micromanaging, and they all get that they should delegate more, like they cognitively grasp its importance, but in terms of more substantive experiments in really delegating, in really letting go, they're failing. And so there's sort of the text-based feedback they might get is that, Tom needs to get out of the weeds and be more strategic, or Tom needs to stop micromanaging so much. Tom needs to trust his people. All those kind of things. And really, in terms of bringing it to intellectual humility, is that at the base of why they persist in doing that, despite suspecting that there might be an alternative, is that there are some deeply held assumptions in there. And these could be assumptions about themselves, about, this is how I've added value for the last 10 years. I'm not going to let someone else take my value. So there could be that kind of personal assumption. It could be interpersonal. So, based on, it could be based on real world evidence, or just a fear that there'll be mistakes brought into the process if they let others do this precious work. so that an interpersonal assumption, or it might be, a bigger, wider contextual assumption, like if this experiment goes wrong, this delegation experiment goes wrong, it'll be awful for me, reputational or wider damage, I won't be given these tasks. So there's lots of assumptions that could sort of perpetuate this malaise. And these people are often quite incredibly busy. They could be on the verge of burnout, but it's because of where and what they're spending their attention on. And meanwhile, the higher level, the more strategic stuff doesn't get cultivated.
I think the most startling example of this was someone, this is years ago, a leader I was coaching who was having 360 feedback to say they really needed to pull themselves out of the weeds and focus on the strategy. And one time I happened to be sitting at a desk near them. I was an in-house organizational psychologist and coach, and they were sitting next to the person who was doing the accounts.
Yeah.
And supporting them, going through the accounts line by line.
Right.
In the environment I was in, I couldn't grab them for a word for various reasons, but it was just such a startling example of this going back to what they'd done previously and missing out on what they should be doing in their leadership role.
Yes, and it's because it's what has brought them success before, but not what's required for the next level.
God, I love the way you've presented these and conceptualized these, Tom. Let's do the remaining two. There was one about, you described, I think, as miscalibrated authenticity.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, that's. Have you ever had, in your organizational work, sort of? Can you think of someone that has done something that might have been socially grating or not effective, and their response has been, but that's me being authentic?
Yeah, many examples of, and it's the kind of person, to me, without sharing an example, but when the people say, well, it's just who I am. Yeah. Or if a group of people are talking about another leader, they just go, oh, that's just the way Ross is. We're never going to change him now. Is it that sort of thing?
It can be, and there's definitely overlaps with that. And it touches on values too, because if they come back with, but that's me being authentic, that's what my values suggest I should be doing here. Now, in terms of what leadership thought leaders bring in here is the idea of responsibility, and it's responsibility over impulsivity. So what you've done and has served you well, it might be based on your strengths, and in past contexts, there hasn't been an issue. But with leadership comes responsibility. So people need something different from you. And I'll choose some examples that I might see in my work. So the 360 feedback might be, I don't need to hear about what they did on the weekend in my, weekly one-on-ones with them, or I don't need to hear about the ongoing family saga. And it's kind of like an oversharing kind of thing, and doing it a little bit like an on button that's on all the time. And so bringing in responsibility, I think Deborah Grunfeld from Stanford calls it that kind of excuse for being authentic links with impulsivity over responsibility. So what do the people need from me here, while also not bringing forth a sense of personal compromise? And I'd like to bring in Russ Harris here, because he's got there's this great white paper he's done. It's on the Contextual Consulting website, and the image he uses there is a spinning globe of the world, and he talks about our core values as being the continents on this globe. And so every situation will put a different light on those core values. So an easier sort of example to give there, if you have a value of care and nurture, how you might express that to a child would be different to how you would express it to a team in a change process. And so you attune it to the audience's needs, and that's the same thing that I'm trying to emphasize in the article. Like this value, how do you mature it for this audience that you want to lead, that look up to you, without this friction? And so, this is a tricky one because I'm not talking about deeper conceptualizations of authenticity and bringing the true self to work. I'm not talking about this. These are behaviors that are socially impulsive. And usually it's because people think of it as an on-off button.
Right.
So if we link this to positive psychology and strengths-based coaching, there's the idea of an overused strength. So often it can get you into trouble. And one way of people getting a fresh lens in these areas is, instead of treating it like an on-off button, to treat it like a volume dial. So you've had something that is, at 9, 8, 9, or 10. And then as a coach, we'd have experiments where, try going in with, at level 4 or 6. And suddenly it's more, I guess, consciously dialed to the context.
I love the idea of that volume.
Yeah. Yes.
Dial.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I had a leader I was working with in financial services who came from Europe, and financial services cultures here in Australia, I suspect, are a bit more serious and somber than what he was used to. And the ongoing feedback was to tone down, and it was a strength that this person described as their authentic vivaciousness. I think it was the word. I think it was vivacious. And it was, felt as hugely compromising. But then in a coaching session, we conceptualize it as a dial, what you could do with that dial in future, situations. And the results following their experiment were very, I guess, liberating for this person, because they realized it was like a fresh perspective on this feedback that they refused to accept. So, but then sort of welcomed in a different way that allowed them to be more effective, but also, more intentional about what to do with this super strength that they had.
So they went away and experimented with dialing it down.
Yeah. Like that was the
nice.
the action following a session. This regular meeting, what would a level 4 feel like?
Yeah.
So it moved from the an on-off switch to something more that they felt that they could drive themselves.
And I guess it's related to that authenticity. There's another one you identify about undermining of psychological safety in cross-cultural teams.
Yes. Now that also is linked to values and also perspective taking. So my idea is there for efficiency or for helpfulness. A leader might feel that at the start of meetings with agenda items, they can give their helpful opinion to get the ball rolling, and some participants, might run with it. Whereas in cross-cultural teams, people from high context cultures, such as in some Asian and African countries, Middle East, because the leader has spoken to say something against them, or what they feel is against this idea, could be seen as a career-limiting move. And so the leader in question, who might have the most benevolent of intentions, could be taking away an opportunity for people to fulsomely contribute, because this narrow swim lane has been set by the leader who's spoken first.
Tom, thank you so much for bringing this to life about what can happen in the absence of intellectual humility. It covers so much of a leadership role. And I think I also love the way you've related it to psychological flexibility and acceptance and commitment therapy. So I'd really recommend that people check out this article from Tom.
What I like to do is make bridging moves between, I'll notice something and I think, oh, that's like, diffusion in acts. So like, Ethan Kross from Michigan, he's written that book Chatter, which is all about helpful versus unhelpful inner voices. And it's all like ACT, but it's not from an ACT domain. Deborah Gruenfeld and those social psychologists from Stanford, I see them as keys to helping me understand, perspective taking and self as context. And so I'm always making bridging moves in my mind. I go running 3 times a week, And that's where I listen to podcasts like your podcast and whatever captures my mind. And that's where I get ideas.
And it feels like it's part of your creativity to make those connections.
Yes, yes.
You're really exercising that in building these bridges for us
Yes.
and for leaders.
Hmm.
I wonder if I could ask what motivates you in your work with leaders, Tom?
Okay, well, there's a couple of things. Well, I like to encourage different ways of thinking, and that's something that we used to do in consulting. We were the experts hired to go and do a project and then come back and get people to see things differently. Coaching is a bit different because working individually, but in working with individuals, I see a lot of the same issues I myself faced between the ages of around 30 to 45 in organizational settings. So it's and coaching wasn't a thing back as an option for me. So I like to help, and not direct, but it's kind of a way of, you've heard of that phrase, me search. It's a different take on that. It's like helping from that perspective. And I'm not ready to retire yet.
And what gives you a buzz in a coaching session? What do you get out of a coaching session? Are there kind of high points?
Yep. So, there's the aha moments within sessions, which a lot of coaches can relate to, I'm sure, but also the between session learning, like when they construct the experiment to be had between sessions and what to look out for, and then coming back with a level of exuberance and learning in the follow-on session. Like it's very rewarding, and it's often not expected. And there's and one of the big themes I see in coaching these days is about effective boundary setting and being able to say no, but not in a selfish way, in a way that works more widely. And some of those experiments are quite inspiring, really. And this relates to intellectual humility as well, in terms of how they see what they can and can't do, the rules about, there might be beliefs around hierarchy and what, and assumptions around what they can and can't say no to, and then testing those assumptions and just showing up intentionally different in those moments. It's great to see.
Yeah. And you mentioned those rules. Is that a trend you're seeing in your leadership work?
This whole idea of how to say no in a way that's not selfish, but in a way that works for all concerned. And there's actually an interesting example that I can sometimes refer to that a lot of clients find insightful. Are you familiar with the work of Adam Grant?
Yes, indeed.
Yes. So one of his lesser referred to books from years ago, but I still refer to it, is one called Give and Take. And in it, he described three types of leader or, organizational participant. One was a giver, so people that give into social interactions without expectation of anything in return. They just purely give. Then there are takers, so people who might on the surface seem like they're, giving voluntarily, but they're in it for more transactional or personal or even selfish reasons. And then there are matchers, and matchers are folk who they might start off as givers, they contribute, but then if they don't notice reciprocity over time, they then withdraw their sort of voluntariness in there. And then Adam Grant asked the question, so which of those groups, so he looks at sort of career outcomes across those groups. Guess which group of those three tends to end up at the top of their career ladders?
I'd hazard a guess at the matchers.
Yes, a lot of people would suggest that. But no, it's the givers. Mm-hmm. And guess which group ends up at the bottom of their career ladders? Bit of a trick question. It's also the givers. So, and the distinction is, and this is actually worth looking up. I think there's a couple of pieces on YouTube where he explains it. Some categories of givers, like those who end up at the bottom of their career ladders, they have what Adam Grant describes as the doormat effect. So they give, but they might have started off their careers with their own to-do lists, but they're compliant in fulfilling other people's requests. The givers at the top of their career ladders have figured that out, have built up social credit because, they have contributed so much, but they also have boundaries. So they use their social standing and respect to actually assert and ask those questions about resources, and that can be quite insightful. Like people that might sense a bit of overwhelm, not setting boundaries, they can really relate to that, with being, a doormat. It's quite a pejorative term, I know, but I'm quoting there directly from Adam Grant. And then it's, the experiments from there, just they've got this, they know where they would be headed if they don't do something about it. And linking this back to psychological flexibility, it's about workability in complex situations, situated action.
Fascinating. Again, you're bridging the space between other research and models and thoughts and psychological flexibility. I love it.
Thanks, Ross.
Now, Tom, I wanted to mention your meditation channel that's informed by psychological flexibility. And I've been having a little bit of a listen. I listened to one this morning.
Okay.
And really enjoying it, Tom. So tell us a bit more about what led to this meditation channel. It's called Grow Gravitas.
Thanks, Ross, for trying it out. So it's something I've often wanted to do. Have you heard of mindfulness-based stress reduction?
Indeed,
the
yes.
8-week program, yeah. So I did that quite early in my coach training. It would have been about 2014 or maybe 2015. And it's sort of sustained a meditation practice since then. And, it's quite a deep engagement at the beginning, like a lot of those meditations are 20, 40 minutes. But in the years that have followed, I've found a lot of good 5 to 10 to, 15 minutes max meditations that, I've got a rotating repertoire and, I go beyond and sort of some things have really stuck with me. And I've heard some great meditations from people in the ACT community. So 5 meditations in there so far, which the library will expand. One of them is directly inspired by one of Dr. Stephen Hayes' meditations, the Sculpture Garden. Another one in there is directly based on one of John Kabat-Zinn's meditations, the Mountain Meditation, which is very useful in sort of interpersonal judgment settings, I think. And there's one on values and a couple more, but yeah, I'll gradually, hopefully, have something that covers each of the ACT processes in the weeks, months ahead.
Wonderful. And as I said in episode 1, that's on YouTube, Insight Timer, and SoundCloud. So I'll make sure those links are in the show notes, Tom.
Excellent. Yes, all with the Grow Gravitas handle.
Tom, I've heard on the grapevine that there might be a book in the offing. You're writing a book. Is that right?
Yes, it's been quite a long-winded process over quite a few years, but gradually getting there. I do tend to overcook my writing. So the origin of this intellectual humility article, like this was supposed to be a short chapter, 900 words, called I Might Be Wrong, and that's okay. But I kept finding new angles and twists on it. And then I did a ruthless cull for the book, but I didn't want to throw out all of this stuff I'd already written. So shaped it for this for that article that appeared in Psychologist last August. So my book chapters will be less dense than that article. So,
well, I can't wait for the book, and I'm hoping whenever that lands, you might consider coming back on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ross. Yes.
Now, Tom, before I say goodbye, I wonder if there's a brief takeaway that listeners might find useful relating to any aspect of the adult experience in the workplace.
I think it's really catch the judginess, the judginess of yourself, about others. And I guess if you do aspire to leadership, the judginess about situations, like what is and isn't possible. And, and holding any assumptions that might stem from that, acknowledging the judginess, holding them up and being prepared to test them or, just be more conscious of them.
It sounds great. I think if we can pause and just check ourselves, like think again, then I think that's really useful to notice that. I love the way you say to notice the judgment of others, of ourselves and of situations. Invaluable, I think, for leaders. Tom, thank you so much for joining me on People Soup. I've loved this conversation and leaving this reflecting on your creativity in your leadership and coaching work. Thank you so much for all that you do.
Thank you, Ross, for those kind words, and thank you for this invitation to be on People Soup. It's been great.
That's it, folks. Part 2 of my chat with Tom in the bag. You'll find the show notes for this episode at peoplesoup.captivate.fm or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like this episode, I'd love it if you told us why. You can email at peoplesoup.pod@gmail.com. On the socials, I'm still posting on Instagram at people.soup, and I'm on LinkedIn as well as a new account on Blue Sky. Just search for my name. Now more than ever, you can help me reach more people with the special People Soup ingredients, stuff that could be really useful for them. So please do share, subscribe, rate and review. Thanks to Andy Glenn for his spoon magic and Alex Engelberg for his vocals. But most of all, dear listener, thanks to you. Look after yourselves, Pea Soupers, and bye for now.
And so, I'm always making bridging moves in my mind. I go running 3 times a week. And that's where I listen to podcasts like your podcast and whatever captures my mind. And that's where I get ideas.